pleased to introduce Ron Roel, founder of the 45 Forward podcast and YouTube channel. Welcome, Ron.
Thank you, Jeff. Pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, great having you. So, why don't we start going back a little bit about your career
hmm
before you became a podcaster and a YouTuber? What were some defining moments? I know that you were a journalist, and what kind of defining moments shaped how you see media today?
Right. Well, I did start way back in what we now call middle school and junior high school in my day. And it really, when I think back, it was a seminal moment when I had to take an elective, and it was either journalism or economics. And being a young man thinking, well, economics is important. Maybe I should do that. And I went and told my mom, and she looked at me and she said, don't you want to be a writer? Isn't that what you really want to do? And I said, yeah, you're right. So, starting with becoming the editor of my junior high school paper to high school paper to in college, I helped revive a magazine when I was an undergraduate at Yale. I won several awards, so I began excuse me, an internship with Newsday, the Long Island daily paper. And that was really it. I mean, it was journalism and writing and, reporting and contributing stories of importance to in many areas. What happened was I had sort of a checkerboard career going back and forth, some with academia, some of the freelance projects, and I ended up spending ultimately about 25 years at Newsday. Um, and because I had been in lots of different venues, I was interested in business journalism. I found, business was to me compelling. It involved money, it involved people's livelihoods, their careers. So I became a business reporter, and then I covered the workplace. That was my beat because people spent a lot of time at work and had a lot of questions about it and had lots of interests and lots of concerns. And so I became a premier writer, special writer about workplace issues. And along the way, um, toward the latter part of my career, um, I went to a seminar, a webinar. Well, it was actually an in-person seminar with a financial planner who looked at us and said, "How many of you have children or are going to have grandchildren? How long do you think they're going to live?" People were like, well, our grandchildren, they might live to like 120. You don't know. That got me thinking, like, okay, so there are lots of issues about retirement and do you have enough money to live that longer? But then I was like, wait a minute. Everything is changing with longevity. We're leading longer and longer lives. What are we going to do with the rest of our life, So it's not just about money. It's about sense of, what do you want to do? Do you want to keep working? What do you do with your family as they grow older, you grow older? What do you want to do with your sense of social mission and purpose? So there are all these issues, and so I ended up working for the paper and starting a section called Act Two, which is just what you think. What do you want to do with the second half of your life? Which of course could have many acts, but that's the beginning act. So that's how I got into this whole sphere of of helping people to lead a successful uh, and purposeful and inspiring life, much along the mission of Life University. Um, and there are lots of questions. So we started a weekly section, and I think the paper was surprised at the interest. They were like it was an immediate success, and so that got me thinking. I'm on the right track in terms of providing
Yeah.
this kind of service. And let's face it, lots of people are now in this space like you, and it connects me with people and organizations and venues like Life University, which I find compelling and stimulating.
And how did creating this section that sounds like it's really for 50 plus readers,
hmm
uh, how did that experience influence what you're doing now?
Well, I think the way it did essentially was that, in the fairly early 2000s, I realized that newspapers were facing a daunting future. Print was in general. So while you did reach a lot of people, there had to be multiple ways to reach people. Um, and, and newspapers were not the only one. And in fact, while it gave me a lot of opportunity, it was also limiting in many ways. You had the paper, you had the daily assignments, so it didn't give me the flexibility or the range I wanted to explore with the subject matter. Plus, um, people weren't reading newspapers. It's still there. The newspapers are still there, but there are many fewer of them. So I was looking for other opportunities to reach people with um, these sorts of topics that you and I cover, and a lot of them, So I was looking for different approaches, different venues, and one of them is just speaking directly to them through a podcast. Um, Now that, to be perfectly frank, it was a combination of intention and accident. You know, as many things are in life. Um, from my first, uh, entry into journalism. So what happened was I was uh, one day I was working on a number of other assignments, and I got an email from uh, my first platform, Voice America, um, and I thought, being of my age, it was Voice of America, which was something entirely different. The government PR branch, which I think now is no longer, as of the beginning of the Trump administration's term, and they've stopped it. But it was not that Voice of America; it was Voice America, and so
Hmm. Hmm.
I was simply approached by a producer who had people researching various potential hosts. He sort of found me and um, essentially offered me a host position, and I said, "Well, what host what?" He said, "Well, you tell me. You create the show." So that was it. That was the creation of the show started there, and as of course, a lot of midlife people use the milestone 50. What are you 50 plus? What are you 50 plus? And so that was my basic premise of starting at midlife. How do you help people think about their next portion of life? And then I said, well, let me try 45 though, because the idea was get ahead of that 50-yard line, get people thinking about it before they get there. And the other interesting aspect to it was I discovered through a friend of mine that there was an interesting sports analogy, which was if you take a football and you want to throw it the farthest distance, what's the angle you need? 45 degrees. So if you want to get
Wow.
farthest you can in your life,
Mhm.
start a little before the 50-yard line. Start at 45. You may not have a plan, but start thinking about it. And once your brain starts working, it's working in the background all the time. And so it can give you the maximum lift to make the most use of your second half of life.
So you were discovered and you founded 45 Forward
Right.
because of let's start a little earlier than 50.
Right.
And yeah, and then you saw a gap in media that you wanted to fill?
Yes, I think that there were, well, first of all, there weren't sort of in-depth shows about this. Yours is one exception, but I saw that I wanted to specialize. I wanted to focus more on things, and a lot of the media, even of course when I was at Newsday, I would cover the stories that are 45 forwards type of stories, but I felt that there wasn't something that was really dedicated to it, and also dedicated to people who were in this time of life, and sort of celebrating them. The more I would talk to people and find guests, I would find people had compelling life stories. I had a guest on a little while ago, and I think he actually this is one of our shared guests, Jack York, who would go around the country uh, interviewing centenarians, right? And they had fascinating stories, and he discovered, well, people didn't know them because nobody asked. So I wanted to be the one to ask the questions and to feature people who had gone and had interesting lives and had many iterations, um, well into their 50s, 60s, and 70s. I had a guest on who was a corporate trainer. Name was Patricia King, and she had that career and that a very successful entrepreneurial career. And then in her 50s said, "I've that's fine. I want to do something else." And at the age of 69, she did what she wanted to do when starting when she was 9 years old, which is to be a novelist. So she published her first historical mystery, and has since then produced, two different series of historical mysteries. So it's like you, not only to the gap was not only celebrating these lives, but also giving people tools to deal with the inevitable concerns. So what I felt the gap was really in what I call just a comprehensive, holistic approach to this part of life. So there's money. Do you have enough money to hopefully live a long life? What about your health? What about your socialization? As you go through life, there are inevitable losses. So how do you compensate for those losses and continue developing relationships? How do you stay healthy in terms of your physical, you know, um, health, your mental health? So I felt that these were, in order to live a successful life, you needed to have a comprehensive approach and integrate all these kinds of levels. So the gap was an integration. That was what I was interested in, helping people look at these things simultaneously and say, well, okay, my money's okay, but what about my health? Or what about now I'm alone? What about my housing? So that was what I felt was missing. It was a sort of an integrative approach that could, basically address many of these things that people have.
Yeah, there are so many topics. And how was the transition from traditional journalism and editing? How did that work to podcasting and
Mm,
blogging and video interviews? What
right.
surprised you the most?
I guess what surprised me the most was I realized that I've always been the curious reporter, who was going out and discovering stories, and the story was the thing, and you were in the background as the reporter. But in podcasting, you got to be upfront and realize that you're the face people see. So what surprised me was the realization that I needed to be, in spite of my, deferential reportorial, perspective, people wanted to hear what I had to say. So I had to basically, be the face of my story and be the inspirer. And in many ways, had to what felt like overact, you know, to get people involved and get people engaged. When that was it, it was really like being on stage. And when a lot of actors say when you're on stage, you have to project. You have to basically speak louder and with more articulation than you think is normal. And so it's not a normal conversation. It comes out being normal, but you have to basically act out of your comfort zone to make it normal. So that was the biggest surprise, realizing that you need to step up and it's okay. You're part of the story. They want to hear what you have to say. What are you going to say to Jeff Nestler? And so that was my biggest surprise in realizing how I had to put myself forward and realize that even though the same was really true as a journalist, people were looking at you in a different way, and that this is a different kind of performance. And in conjunction with our times, that people have a short attention span, and we know that, but we don't know what it means in terms of how we need to present. And so, even
Mm,
though part of what I want to do is to cover things in a more comprehensive way and give people some real substance and information about these topics, I got to figure out a way to do it in smaller bites. Because people, even in the time, the relatively short time I've been doing this, there have been lots of changes, and there are, as you know, there are millions of podcasts. So why should they listen to Ron Roel? Why? So, it's that, you know, as with any entrepreneurial effort, um, you have to have good content and a good idea and a good concept, but you've got to spend a lot of time figuring out how do you get people to find you and listen to you and stay with you.
Yeah, and what are some other big technical or creative challenges that you faced when moving into this area of podcasting and YouTube production?
Well, I think it's technology, the biggest challenge. It's technology is like technology, and then there's technology. You know, so um, like many of us, I'm not a digital native. Um, I've been learning along the way. It's been a big learning curve. Since that my initial entry, I've now doing the podcast myself on my own. I have another platform, but I don't have other people handling the marketing or handling the production. I'm doing it myself with the assistance of some other people who work for me. Um, but the challenges is really keeping up with the technology, understanding how to use it, and frankly, how not to get frazzled by it. Things will happen; they will happen. I remember at one point going through I have experienced discovered is but if something goes wrong, we can't fix it. So that's where it's problematic, and as you've discovered too, sometimes you know no one is really sure what happened with the technology. Why didn't this happen? Why couldn't they get on? Why couldn't my guests get on? What happened to the sound? And the the ultimate answer is the simplest one: reboot, start over, and then right, and then it works, and you're like, well, why does it work now? I don't know. But that's the thing. And so just to be prepared to reboot has been what I've discovered, or go through the power cycle again, which is a fancy way of them saying just unplug and plug in again. Um, and then accompanied with that is just like take a deep breath. It's okay. um, Enough of us have been involved in this field, and I guess it was really, um, pushed along by COVID, right? And everyone started doing this when they had to do it because there was no other way to communicate and carry on programs except to do it. So we got used to the fact that things will happen, and if your cat is walking on the screen afterwards, your audience will understand, but they're not going to go like, "Oh, what's that?" It's just we know. So this has become part of life, and so you can relax a little bit. Don't sweat about it. People will understand, and you'll do the best you can. And are you providing good information for people? And do they see that? And do they appreciate it? And are you connecting with them? And then if things happen, they happen. You know. And the worst that could happen for me right now is that I'll have to redo it, re-record it. It's I've done that once. It's not very often, but actually the second recording was much better than the first. So there are opportunities to improve all along the way, and to try to stop and be in the moment, enjoy it, be with your guest, do a good job, and then do it again.
There's an advantage to pre-recording.
There
And
is, there
yep.
is. But even if you don't pre-record and just do it live, it's like it's okay.
Hmm.
You did the best you could. That's fine. You know, do another one. If you're still enjoying it, do another one. You know,
That's true. And so, and also how COVID brought so many of us onto YouTube and onto online. and into technology. That's a good
Right.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you define your voice as a host? And how would you say that it's evolved since you first started this endeavor?
Um, Not literally by voice, or but by greater voice, right? Because some
Yeah,
people have said to me, "Oh, well, you started doing podcasting. You do have a really nice radio voice." And I was like, I said, "Well, to be honest with you, the person who recruited me never heard my voice, so it wasn't because he heard my voice and said you have a good voice, but I do feel that my voice has been developing, in terms of my subject matter, um, just being authentic and personable, you know, um, trying to, it's not casual, but it is sort of just conversational, engage the guest, be in conversation with them. That's sort of my style, and to contribute what because I've gone through a lot of these experiences myself. If I do a lot of coverage we can get into later about caregiving, family caregiving. And so I spent a lot of time with my brothers taking care of my elderly mom before she passed on. So, be personable, be engaging, be authentic, um, and, don't know what you know, but also, um, don't, you have a guest, so you're featuring the guest and you're in conversation and people want to listen to your guest. But again, they want to listen to you and your relationship to the guest. So my voice, I think, has gotten more in terms of of being more assertive and being part of the show and directing it and participating, being a participant with the guest as opposed to just being the interviewer. So I think that's been changing as become more part of the show in that sense and part of the conversation with the guest.
and you've found some really good guests to interview on 45 Forward. Do you have a particular outreach project? How do you find them? Do you have a particular criteria that you use for selecting people?
Well, people have asked me, well, how do you find your guests? And not meaning to be flip about it, I say, well, I find them everywhere, and it's true. I mean, so the first thing is that over the course of my career, I've gotten involved in many networks that provide advice for seniors. Some parts of groups like the National Aging in Place Council, I'm an active member there. I'm on the executive council for AARP New York. So, in the process of being in these networks, as well as writing, I still, I have a newsletter. I do still do a lot of writing and blogging about um, um, what I call successful aging, like you do, and people then they find you and they say, "Oh, let's have a conversation." So, I mean, I find a lot of guests through these networks and through my writing. And, I'm my selection is essentially, um, I look at their resume, I look at what they've done, and look at, what I think they can contribute to a show. Um, and then we have a conversation. I call them up or email them and say, well, let's talk about this. How would we do this show? What would you talk about? So I get a good sense of what we would talk about and do an outline for the show, which is covers a certain number of topics, but then can be very conversational and allow for certain improvisation and spontaneity. Um, so I just sort of gauge, is this could from from my research and my conversation with the person, like, oh, can he or she carry the show? And also, would they enjoy it? Some people they freeze up or they get self conscious, and it's like, okay, maybe this isn't the right venue for you. But most of the time, they do like it, and like after I'm done with the recording, we have just a sort of a check afterwards. How do you think it went? And the comments, the first two comments from the guests is usually, wow, that went fast. And number two, that was really fun. It was enjoyable. So I do want it to be an enjoyable experience so that people can feel like, the excitement and the passion of the guests and the interest of the guests. Um, so I do want people who are passionate about their field and care about it and care about the people they're serving. So that's I want to get a gauge of how committed they are to what they do.
What are some of your favorite or especially memorable interviews that you've done, and what made them so special for you?
Well, I think one of my special ones was with Ken Dykewald, who was the author initially of Age Wave, and the company
Mm.
Age Wave. And he was somebody that I ran across in my work as a board member of the Gray Panthers. I listened to a webinar he had done, but I had followed him since the late 1980s when I actually interviewed him for a story I did about older workers. Um, so it was fun for me to reconnect with him really over, 25, 30 years, um, and to see where he had gone and to um, appreciate what he had done. He's really one of the icons in the field, and so um, it was very enjoyable and enlightening for me, and I think for him too. You know, um, I sent him a 45 forward mug afterwards, which I think he appreciated. Um, and I think that it's it just again be able to reconnect with people over a span of time. Um, so I had one of my college roommates um, became a very successful financier, um, and then a few years ago, as he retired, he started from scratch. Like the woman I mentioned before, he wrote a novel, a crime thriller, a high tech crime thriller. And so it was a pleasure for me to go back over time and see how he had progressed and how people's lives are involved, or evolve. Um, the woman I mentioned before, who wrote the historical mystery at the age of 69, she then had a third act where one of her books dealt with a detective in Africa, and as a result of that, doing research at this time of Africa during the early 1920s, she discovered issues about female exploitation, and so she then began helping out a nonprofit in Africa to help young women, to be independent young women and not essentially be slaves. So that to me was, I'm inspired by these stories of people, and people do like stories. They like life stories. Um, so I think that those are some that I felt really gratified to bring to life. Um, there are a lot of them. I mean, I've done about 250 of them. So there are lots to choose from. And as a matter of fact, they cover a whole range of stuff. I have some pragmatic ones um, that so one I had recently was about Social Security. Well, I'd say, well, but it's a totally different kind of a story. But again, understanding Social Security is really important as you get older in life, and what it can do, and what the limitations are, and what the potential uh, drawbacks are. At this point of our life, as things are changing with the government, and so you know, giving people information. He's a columnist. He's got his own podcast. His name is Mark Miller. Um, so even though it was sort of a very pragmatic one, I felt really good that we were providing very straightforward, useful, direct information for our audience about how they can make sure that a valuable part of their second half of life will be there for them. So there are episodes like that. I'll just give you one more. Um, Again, I think this is someone that you, Jeff, Scott Fulton, who is a longevity expert, and he has a lot of compelling information about how do you physically take care of yourself as you get older, and a lot of his podcasts and webinars are about. You know, the vitality of what the potential vitality is for your body and your mind as you get older if you take care of it. So yeah, I mean, there are lots of guests that have inspired me, and I think that's one. You know, in terms of providing good information, there is always sort of an inspirational part to it. You know, and people, it's a quest for a lot of people. It's a sort of a spiritual quest. So that's what I look for is some sort of really some aspect to people who are on a quest to contribute something, to leave a legacy to life.
Yeah, and some of these folks are hard to get. They're really busy, like Dykewell at Fulton.
Right.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's a wonderful acquisition that you accomplished.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what are some of the mistakes or learning curves, maybe just one,
Yeah.
that you I know you mentioned having to re-record one.
Right.
What did some of those learning curves teach you?
Well, I guess the main learning curve was I alluded to earlier a little bit, which is basically um, recognizing that I'm one of many options people have to listen to. Um, there's been an interesting, so I started out as an audio podcast, and now I'm on YouTube, and so people can watch it on YouTube as well as then it links to various podcasts where they can do it as an audio podcast. So what I've learned is that these are different. There's a different approaches, and the learning curve really has, and I'm still on the curve, learning how basically to get this information to people and to give them a good product in a way that they have time to listen to it. So the thing that I'm working really on now is just the recognition that the my main competition is not even other podcasts that have similar kinds of shows and guests and information, but time. That's the basic thing. How do you get produce something in a way that people can have the time to listen to it and listen to the whole thing? Because
Hmm.
often the conversations, I want to do a little bit of a longer form to give people some. Well, that's one of the reasons I didn't, I left conventional journalism because it's always in bite, 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 bite. And also, I wanted an opportunity to give longer bites to people, more information, while realizing that they don't have time often for that much longer. So, how can I cover certain subjects but cut it up into more manageable episodes and chapters? So, I'm working on a variety of like longer shows that people can then take shorter chapters and listen to them. And that's been an interesting experiment, and a lot of this business is kind of trial and error. You just try this and, oh, this worked. I didn't expect that, but this worked. So my main challenge and on the curve is learning how to manage the time of the shows, and in a way that can give people a sense of completion about listening to a whole show, but not having to commit an hour to it. So I will continue to do some term, long form shows, but also have an opportunity to break them up into smaller pieces so that it can have greater flexibility in getting to more audiences. So that's been the biggest lesson I've learned is that life is a matter of how you manage your time and how you help your guests and your audience manage their time, because otherwise they'll they'll sign off. you know.
Yeah. And what has surprised you about your audience in terms of demographics or feedback or engagement that you've have, and how's that shaped how you do the show?
Well, I think that the surprises are really that it it engages people in ways that I don't expect. Okay, and some shows that I don't think be that popular, in fact, are popular. Um, I think what it's taught me really is that to take educated guesses. I mean, you can do some of this. You can do keyword searches, and you can find out, um, what people are looking for and that they need to know about. So you can go in the right direction, but um, I think the surprises for me have been um, that to be open to things you didn't expect. You know, you can predict certain things, but um, take certain risks in things that you didn't expect. That and they will be rewarded. And also, don't you know? I guess you've got to reach out to people too, because I think, well, gee, I don't know who heard this show or and so forth, and then somebody will come up to me and say, well, you know what, I really like that show. I'm like, great, okay. Um, so I've had to learn, in terms of, and again, this is I'm still on this learning curve of like, well, how do you find out from people? Because people sometimes will tell you they like something, but often they will like it, but they don't say anything. So it's how to basically stimulate the conversation and get feedback. So that's been a challenge I've really been working on is how you continue to be in conversation with your audience. Um, and some of that requires you to be more assertive in terms of asking them, "Hey Jeff, what did you think of the show?" Emailing, "What did you think?" As opposed to just letting it go out there and seeing what happens. So if you want to really continue developing, you have to put an effort into stimulating the conversation, not only with your guests but with your audience.
Yeah, because people might not necessarily send in a compliment, but certainly there'll be a squeaky wheel if there's something they didn't like,
That's right. That's
which is
right.
also helpful, but
Yeah.
yeah, you want to know what works too.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And you're also an author. You wrote The Caregiving Navigator.
Right.
You mention on roelresources.com, which is your website,
Right.
ROEL Resources, that you and your brothers cared for your mother for 25 years. Uh, how did that influence your decision to write a book, or how did it inform your content?
Yeah. Well, there's nothing like personal experience. um, and so I started, in the early '90s, 1990s, when my dad unfortunately passed away, and leaving my mother alone. We were all around, so that was good. But it sent me on a journey since she got married very young, and she was now and had was very a smart woman, but he didn't know how to basically do a lot of things, as you go in life as a widow. So I began, from the very beginning, finding out about, well, how do you prepare for, caring for someone, and that there are different stages of caring. So there's the initial, okay, well, now what about all the finances, the preparation, the planning, the insurance, the healthcare proxies, all the legal and financial preparation, and then aging in place. How do you? My mom said, I want to stay in my home forever. So I had to think about, well, how do we do that? How do we make sure she has enough money to do that? She was living in a high cost area, but that's what she wanted. So how do you make that happen? And then as you go along, you, you people get frailer, and so how do you deal with what they if they need help at home, or do they will they get to a point where they have to go to some supportive housing, and then there's that then dealing later with potential chronic diseases. How do you manage them? How do you take care of them? How do you continue engaging, keeping them engaged in life right up until the end? So, in the process of doing this, in my personal experience, I was also very involved with ARP as a volunteer, and one of their local managers came to me and said, "Wow, you're going through this whole experience. Do you want to write about it?" And so that my first draft was with ARP, Caregiving Guide. Now they have caregiving; they're very involved in caregiving, family caregiving now. It's one of their major priorities, and I continue to work with them in terms of programs for caregiving. And so the caregiving aspect of it in two ways, Jeff. One is realizing this is an area, a particular area that people don't think about when they're planning their 45 forward life. Many of us just sort of we they were in denial. Well, I'll be fine, and inevitably you're not fine. You need help, So this is a particular area that people were not very versed in, and frankly, the our tradition is that your family takes care of you, but things have changed. Families are all over the place; they're not available, and so how do you when you get older, how do you get make sure you're taken care of and can take care of people in your family who live 1,000 miles away? So it became a specialist within successful aging, an area that I realized that people did not really needed information and needed options to how to do this. Because there are lots of options, but you don't know about them, and you don't know about them until you're in the middle of them. So that's where I wanted to get people 45 forward, thinking this two thirds of people as they get past 65 will need some sort of long term care. It's a fact. We just don't want to admit it. So it was a particular area that I thought needed a lot of attention. And the guide itself is, since everyone's life is very different, it doesn't say do this. It just says here are the issues. Okay, here are the issues that you need to think about. Here are the resources that are useful to you. Here's like a list of questions you need. Here are things you don't might not be thinking about. So I give them templates for checklists and questions to ask, so that they can be sort of a starter kit for you in each area of your life. And so this is a particular area, but then it was sort of symptom, it was symbolic of a lot of healthy aging as you go forward, which is so it was a metaphor for the amount of collaboration and thought you needed to put into your second half of life, and the fact that you're getting older, but your life is still very much intergenerational and caregiving as such. So it basically is one of these things where it's a multi generational project. It's your older, now adults, kids who are taking care of you, but sometimes you're taking care of grandchildren you didn't expect to. So it was really a completion of a cycle of life that I found intriguing and important for people to really be focused on. And there's information, but it's so disparate. Again, I wanted to put it in one place where people can say, "Here's where I am now. Here's where I might be. Maybe I won't be there, but I can plan for it." And 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 that the planning was the key to life. At least have options. If you have no plan, then you're stuck. Then your things happen to you. But I wanted to give people options so that they can manage their life and they can maximize their agency in determining their future.
Do you have any uh, upcoming projects like books or series of interviews or any courses that you're excited about?
Well, a couple of things, yeah. I mean, for one thing, so my first version of my Navigator was for Long Islanders, because that's where I am, and people like resources near where they are. So I have the resources there with the book, and now I'm going to expand it, realizing that even people I've met on Long Island, like, well, I'm here, but my parents are in North Carolina, so what do I do about for them? So I'm in the process of basically broadening. I will keep the resources for the guide, and I'll put it on. It's called Caregiving Nav NAV.com. That's the caregiving website. So what I'm doing is trying to come up with a model, so which I'm working on, in which I have all the basic strategies and checklists and things you need to know in a book format that people can have, but that the resources will be things that they can either have on my website, or they can have resources that can provide local help wherever their parents or wherever they are. And that way, because these resources may change, and having them in print, Is okay, they may be out of date. So this way I can give people
Mhm.
the basic strategies, which are basic, are stable and evergreen, but also have the resources on my website where they can have the latest. And through, a lot of AI programs, you can make sure that these resources are up to date. And that's what people need. They can't waste time. They need to know uh, that your contacts and your information is up to date. So that's one big project is the nationalizing of the Navigator. Um, and the other area is also caregiving. Now we're coming into November, so I'm going to do some, a compendium of shows that I've done over the years dealing with dementia and Alzheimer. Um, November is National Family Caregivers Month, and also I think it's Alzheimer's. There are two sort of June and November have various dementia and Alzheimer's related
Mhm.
themes, and so I'm going to be putting together just a compendium of my shows that deal with various aspects of dementia, because that's also, as we get older, that's when things I discover that's when area people really have a lot of concern about and need the most help. You know, caregiving at any stage involves a lot of emotions and a lot of skills and talents and preparation. But it's when people have dementia, that's when they really need a lot of help, and it's emotionally the most difficult. So that's what I'm also, I'm a volunteer for the Alzheimer's Association. I do educational webinars for them. So that's an area where I want to contribute because that's where people, even more than worrying about running out of money, they worry about, you know, their mental health. So yeah, I'm blending a lot of. I'm very active, with the Gray Panthers, NYC, and ARP in terms of advocacy. So, in a general sense, that's one area that I'd like to be more active in than I am now, which is advocating for older adults. And that's something that I find, um, troubling. That we know we're this is where we're headed. We're all getting older. As a society, we're getting older, and yet there's a tremendous lag in terms of providing resources for us as we get older, and basically recognizing that um, the contributions that older people make to society. And a lot of them are economic. It's not like all of a sudden we're not the takers. We're still the givers in many ways. You know, we provide a tremendous contribution to the economy in terms of what we do. In terms of we're all working older. We're all doing more, and yet I find that our public policy is really lagging in many areas, and it's really fragmented.
Mhm.
So that's an area of advocacy that in spite of the many challenges of the way organizations and our government agencies are structured, working with other groups, because there's a lot of really good groups and coalitions out there, helping us develop a more cohesive um, approach to the future for older people that we all are going to be, because otherwise we're wasting incredible talent, resources, and we can't afford to, frankly. We can't afford to. Um, so making, working with people to make sure that older people are included in what in ARP we call an age-friendly society. That we design policies that are of most benefit to the most generations. Um, and the simplest, metaphor that's often used is like if you want to basically, in making your streets safer for older people, if you put curb cuts right right at the corners where people can go through with wheelchairs and walkers, that those sorts of things are not just good for seniors, they're good for young couples who are rolling their kids in carriages. So there are ways to think about how we can make an age-friendly society and an age-affirming society. Um, but it goes back to my basic. You got to do a little planning. When you
Mhm.
start doing these things, think about it from that perspective. So the age-friendly thing and advocacy is something that is definitely a substantial part of this next chapter for me.
Right. So we just need to make sure that policymakers see that it's a win-win for everyone. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a win-win, and it's when yes, most of the concern is about money and budgets. Um, that if you have the plan that is a little bit more has more foresight to it, that you know if you look at some of these expenditures to make things better for seniors, they're really investments in more cost-effective approaches because if you're just doing it as a crisis, then you send people to nursing homes and hospitals, and that's 10 times more expensive than if you have a strategy that keeps them safe and comfortable and healthy in their homes.
Going back to your audience, what do you hope someone 45 or older or in their second half of
Hmm.
life takes away from 45 forward or Roel resources?
Mm. I guess the main thing is that this is doable. A lot of people are overwhelmed by, you know, the challenges and the concerns. So that I want to take away is like, no, no, you can do this. We all can do this. Um, as opposed to that, well, let's see what happens, you know. Um, and I think that is unfortunately, like people um, have what I call facetiously PDD, planning
Hmm.
deficit disorder. They don't want to plan. It's, I'll just see what happens, And so, what I hope that people get away is that there are ways to do this, and they're cost effective, and they make your life better. Um, and so, I guess the major takeaway is that life in the second half can be, my tagline is, make the second half of life even better than the first. And in many ways, yes, there are. There are many challenges, especially in terms of health. I mean, now I feel myself okay. Or I'm going to like my my joints are aching. Okay, what? How do I deal with that? Is that an arthritic condition? There are all these issues and potential, mainly with health, but that this part of life can be not only fulfilling, but in some ways, given that how much you've learned for your first half of life, can be even more fulfilling and more purposeful and more meaningful. So that's what I want people to come away with, that potential for being a rich part of life, not a life of decline. That's the major method. My message is that life can be vital in many ways unexpectedly. And you asked before, why any surprises? I think people are surprised by how enriching this part of life can be, and in ways you don't expect. Um, uh, but in ways that you couldn't appreciate when you were younger. You didn't know enough. You didn't know what was important. So even in issues where there are inevitable losses, you get older, you lose your friends, you lose family. There's mortality. You're not able to be as physically active as you were. But there are gains in that, and that also you can be there are gains through loss, which is it forces you to focus on, well, what's really important. What are the important things in life? How do I really want to spend this time? So for many people as they get older, this part of life is actually through um, through dealing with loss, they learn how to appreciate their gains and appreciate um, what they can get out of life. And it really focuses you, to really say, let me make this count. So, what I want people to come away with is, how can you make this part of life count as much as possible, and and define not only purpose but a sense of joy. People talk about, gosh, there's real joy in this part of life, and to really appreciate that,
And before we wrap it up,
right?
uh, I wanted to ask you if you have any advice out there for people who want to get started as a blogger or podcaster or YouTuber or all three.
Yeah. Well, I think, Um, I guess a couple things. One is the preparation, and the good thing is that there are lots of resources, and yes, people sort of like wink about Chat GPT, but you can ask a lot of questions. You can get so if you go into it, do your homework. Look at the different options. In my case, I had a couple of different platforms in which they were the host, and now I'm basically running the show with a platform called Riverside. It's not a Zoom platform, but to just ask questions and um, set up your options ahead of time, um, and really uh, also be clear as part of the preparation. What's your goal? Um, is it to be a marketing aspect for the rest of your business? Is it something? I mean, for me, so it is what I want to do. So it's not like I'm doing a podcast because I'm an elder law attorney or I'm a different kind of provider, and so just gives me a marketing platform. It is what I want to do. Um, it is, it's this is the podcast itself is about providing a service to people. But what is your goal? In some cases, it may be I want to use it as a supporting marketing vehicle for what I do, my real job. So be clear about what your purpose is. Um, be aware that if you know once you set it up, can you sustain what you want to do? So if you say I want to do this weekly, and then you can, and you realize I can't do it weekly, setting up realistic expectations, I think, is important. So do what you can do and manage, and do it consistently, because that's people want consistency. So if you want to do it once a month, okay. Want to do it once a week, okay. but but be very clear with yourself. Be honest with yourself. What is my capacity? What are my resources? Can I do this? Um, and because like everything you do, it's going to take more time than you think. It just will. There are things you can't predict, you can't expect. So one of my mottos is, plan but don't predict, because you never know. So is be methodical and be um, realistic about what it is you can do and what you want to do, um, and also, as I mentioned earlier, be prepared to kind of change and shift. You're doing a certain thing, and now realizing, well, that doesn't quite work. Don't be rigid. Be willing to change and adapt as you discover things in the process and get feedback from your audience.
Well, and it sounds like you are following your own advice. It really sounds like you're you're going to stick to this for the long haul. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Chef. It's been a pleasure, as
Thank
always, with you.